And we are live. Hi everyone, and welcome to this new live stream session. I hope you can hear me well and there are no technical problem. I didn't forget to click the button this time, so it should be working. And so today we're going to talk about, of course, our favorite mountain, because that's where we spend a couple of months every year, and that's Jingmai Mountain. So to carry me on through this session, I will brew our newly released tea. We just released it a couple of hours ago. This is the Cholan, the Jingmai Autumn 2023 Gushu. We made very few of it this year. Currently we only have 16 cakes available. They might sell out quite quickly, but we have another batch which is in the pressing factory at this time. So I won't open this one because I need to keep it for the orders, but I have the sample of this, and that's what I'm going to brew now. And let's not waste time, because there's a lot of things to tell about Jingmai, because I gathered a lot of information about Jingmai. Actually, I did my master's thesis on Jingmai, on the agricultural system of Jingmai, and that UNESCO application. Maybe we will mention it, but first let's go on the let's get again. Okay, first let's go on Google Earth, and I will show you the general localization. Okay, so let's zoom out. So here is China, we go southwest, this is Yunnan, and here we have southern Yunnan, Sichuan-Bana. Jingmai is located in Pu'er County, which is right in the middle there. You have Linsang more in the north, and it's actually pretty hard to find Jingmai because there's no obvious point of interest, you could say. So here we have Jinghong, the capital city, the Mekong River. We go west, we go to Monghai. This is Monghai. Then in the west of Monghai you have a very large plateau in which they grow a lot of rice, which is Mongzhe. It used to be the capital of the kingdom of Sichuan-Bana. And then we have to go through another mountain up there, and then we go north. We have another smaller plateau, which is Mongman, which is also a Dai territory. And west of this plateau is Jingmai Mountain. If I zoom out again and remove all the labels, well, yeah, there's not much to see. You can see, while here in the south we have that big mountain range that looks like a spaceship, and then we have a bit more topography. Last time we did the live stream, we explored the summit, the peak of Sichuan-Bana, north of Monghai. And here we have a collection of small hills. So in the west here you have Myanmar. You have a collection of small hills, and Jingmai happens to be there. So it's quite hard to locate that. There's no specific feature. You can see, if you go north, you have a big mountain range which you can see well from our house in Jingmai, which is the Fajianhe mountain range, and it leads to Lansang. So Lansang is the city to which Jingmai is attached, and where typically kids will go to school, and people will just go to the supermarket and things. So we're about an hour and a half by car from Lansang. You just go back through this valley, and you see I'm already lost. Okay, we have the plateau, the Mongman Plateau here, which we can see, and Jingmai is this area. You could say that the main noticeable feature is the Nanlang River, which really clearly marks the northeastern limit. Okay, now my map is oriented north. So we have this river, the Nanlang River, which marks the crossing towards Jingmai. And then Jingmai is a collection of villages, and you could say it's comprised of two mountains. you know it's famous for the Tapinjang Plateau, so you can see that it's a relatively flat top on Jingmai, on which most of the tea gardens are established. So this is Jingmai proper, this is the Jingmai main village, and our house is just down here. So Jingmai main village has a lot of tea gardens, and the other notable mountain is this one. This is Mangjing. It's quite characteristic because it has two bumps, so in a way it looks a bit like a camel somehow. And yeah, okay, so we're going to talk about all this today. Yeah, let's first show you the main villages. So when you go from the main road, from the Huimin town, so Huimin is a small town just there. You take a windy road, and then you cross the river. There is a bridge here, and then you go up, so you cross the Nanlong River. You can see here there are a few rubber tree plantations. Okay, they are in a row, but it's bigger than tea trees. You can see this is tea gardens here, and these are rubber plantations. They are trees. It's not that common in the area, but somehow they had a contract probably decades ago with some rubber companies there. And so the first village will be Mangang. Then you have Mongban here. And you can see here the Gushu gardens, the ancient tea gardens are all around here. So Mangang and Mongban are fairly small villages, and so they have a good amount as well of ancient tea gardens. You can clearly see the difference between ancient tea gardens. Like for example, this would be untouched forest, like natural forest. These are natural tea gardens. You can see the high plantation density and low forest cover. And then if you go around here, you can see it's mainly trees, but you can see dots, and these are tea trees. So typically those ancient tea gardens are established around the villages. We can see some paddies down there, some tea plantations, natural tea gardens here with low forest cover. And by the way, these pictures date from 2013. At this time, it was still conventional intensive tea plantations. So that's why you have a poor forest cover. And since then, we're gonna see that. Since then, they have implemented changes in the garden design. So if you have new satellite pictures, the difference might be less obvious. So we have Mangang and Mongban. These are Dai villages. Then if you turn left here, at the bottom here, you have Lao Jiufang. This is a Han village. If you stay on the main road, you arrive in Jingmai main village, Jingmai Tajai, which is the biggest village, and which has a lot of tea gardens, because you can see this is Tapinjang Plateau here. It's a relatively flat area at the top of the mountain, and all these, you can see here is natural forest, and here is tea gardens. So you can see a moderately dense forest cover there. And so what you see here is probably the biggest contiguous ancient tea garden in the world, as far as we know. And that's partly why it became a UNESCO heritage site. If you continue there, you have lots of plantations, which again, since 2013, have been converted, and you'll have a thicker forest cover nowadays there. We'll see pictures in a minute. And then you have this intersection. If you go north, you go to some other Dai villages. You have Nogan. So Nogan, they have a new village here, and an old, very beautiful village with traditional houses, which is in a pit, kind of, and which is also surrounded by some ancient tea gardens, but in terms of surface, they don't have that much. you can see basically here compared to that much in Jingmai Tadzai. And yeah, there's still a good amount in Mongban and Mangang. The bulk of the tea gardens, the ancient tea gardens in Jingmai Mountain is here, okay? Then, if you continue going north, you have the village was still in construction. You can see since then it's all houses. There they already built the terraces. And this is Nanzhou. This is a Wa village. This is probably the most recently implanted village in Jingmai. They are Wa, so it's again another minority, which is a very minor minority, you could say, in the area. There are very few Wa people. And the last one would be Hani. This is Longpong. Again, this is kind of the border with Jingmai. There's no clear border to Jingmai outside of the Nanlong River. So, but since you have only forest if you keep going northwest, so we consider that Longpong is the last village, and also administratively is the last village to belong to Jingmai, and so it's a Hani village. Again, probably quite recently implanted, and they don't have ancient tea gardens at all, I think. If you go there, you have Bangwai. This is a Dai village, but interestingly, they are Dai, but from Xishuangbanna. Okay, most of the Dai in Jingmai don't come from Xishuangbanna. In Xishuangbanna, they are Shui Dai, the water Dai, because they grow rice traditionally, and mostly in Jingmai they are Han Dai. Han Dai, so the Dai from the mountains, and they come mainly from Myanmar. So Bangwai is the only village with Dai people from Xishuangbanna. They also have a limited quantity of ancient tea gardens. So all that northern part is mostly Dai, with a Han village, a Wa village, and a Hani village, but those are pretty small. And if you go south, back at this crossroad, if you go south, then you enter the Bulang territory. And so all these villages are Bulang. So here you will have Wonghua, I think. Let me see. If you go on this road, yeah. So this is Wangji. This is a very popular tourist village. They restored it with only traditional houses, and they are mainly the tourism industry. And you can see all these scattered, like sparsely, like moderately dense forest is ancient tea gardens, as opposed to, for example, this plot, which is a natural untouched forest. Then you have Wonghua. Wow, I didn't see it as big. This is actually a pretty big village, but not so famous, interestingly. And yeah, here they have a bit of ancient tea gardens, but not so much. And then if you keep going on the main road, you have Mangjing. So you have Mangjing lower village and upper village there. And then you have Manghong. Manghong also has a decent amount of ancient tea gardens, but the bulk of the ancient tea gardens in that mountain belongs to Mangjing, the main village. And you can see all here with the bumps like this. They are quite you can see it. So you can see we're here, and so Jingmai would be in the background there. So we can see, go back to Taxingzhang here, and here we have Mangjing. Mangjing tea is actually really nice. Oh, okay, I'm going to brew my tea. And so let's take a break from Google Earth, and I'm going to show you a few pictures. We're first going to have a look at the landscape. Let me just check. Hi everyone. So thank you for watching. There are 25 people currently, so I hope you will enjoy this live stream. And I'm brewing our autumn tea that we made. Maybe I can show you a bit what the leaves look like. Maybe you can see it here. Up. They are quite yellow. Yeah, it's very fragrant. I love that young tea autumn fragrance. Especially in Jingmai, it's quite characteristic. I had it this afternoon because I was writing the product description. And so, let me just check the comments. Hello from Romania. Yeah, we have orders to Romania quite frequently. Thank you for watching and thank you for enjoying tea in Romania. Okay, so let's go on the pictures and let's start with a general overview. So I've made 4 files and this one is called landscapes. So you can see here, this is all natural forest, and interestingly, so this is the southern edge of Jingmai, of Tappingjiang Plateau. You can see Mangjing in the background with the 2 hams. You see, so these are where the nice tea grows in Mangjing, and interestingly, that southeastern side of Jingmai Mountain has not been planted at all, and it's always puzzled me why wouldn't they grow crop. Okay, let's hope this server will work better. I think we're live again. And so, yeah, I'm going to show you first a few landscape pictures. There, I think we're looking towards Xishuangbanna. You can see some tea gardens on the slope. Yeah, this is and so when I go to a new mountain, I like to go to a viewpoint like this and have a look at the general landscape. In Jingmai, they also grow honey. You can find honey like how do you call that? Beehives in the tea gardens. So we also produce quite a lot of honey. Each family does that. So this is quite unique. Like you have honey made of tea flowers. And yeah, in those landscapes, I also included the soil. Sorry, I didn't have time to sort the pictures, but what you can notice when you go to Jingmai is quite a thick litter, especially on the top of Jingmai. You can notice a thick litter. So the litter is just what's above the soil, all the decomposing matter, like the dead leaves, the dead plants, which slowly become organic matter and which make the soil dark. And it's good to have a dark soil when you're doing farming because you get better water and nutrient retention capacity. And then I remember on that day I walked down and my topic of the day was to study the soil and the rock. And so on some slopes you can have a glimpse at the rock. And so this rock looks very stratified. You see, almost like schist. I did some research and I remember I found it could be a phyllite, but I'm not really sure about this. But what's sure is, yeah, you have layers like this in the rock, but it's quite hard to find the rock, the bedrock. This is on the lower slope, so we're quite far down the village, closer to the Nanlang River. And you can see that there they have some tea gardens, but they also have paddies, and some of those paddies are not used anymore. They just flood them. A lot of them, they flood them and just grow fish there. Then you can just fish with fishing pole or electric fishing with a car battery, or you can just empty the paddy and collect the fish. Yeah, so these are some old tools they use, the typical tractors with adapted wheels. I don't know why this one looks more like a swamp. Oh yeah, and that's an interesting picture here because you can see the change in color. And what I learned at school, at least, is that when you see this is actually rust, and this is called micro-oxidation. And this happens when at some point in time the soil is deprived of oxygen. So if you see a rock like this, it means that at some point during the year the soil is waterlogged. And this is something that I only found quite at a low altitude. Okay, but this gives us clues about the soil water retention capacity and its draining capacity. And it's quite important for the tea farming, because the tea tree doesn't like to have its roots wet. Okay, it likes to have a dry soil, and so generally it doesn't like to grow in a waterlogged condition like this. It will cause problem. Yeah, you can see some close-in of that rust effect, which affects the rock. And here it looks like this is already heavily degraded rock. So you're at the middle stage in which it's like a paste, like you can even crush it with your hand, and it's half soil and half rocks, which is very, even more so when you have lots of water in there. You have that soil formation process. Originally all the soil is rock, and the soil degrades through physical, chemical and biological processes, but that's for another topic. I have some earlier videos mentioning that. And this is also old pictures. I remember that day I collected soil. So on the left here you can see this is soil from the upper slope. Okay, so you can see it's red. It has a poor organic matter content, and it feels very sandy. Okay, you can easily just have it burst. It's very loose. And on the right, it has a higher amount of organic matter, but more notably, you know, if you have your soil like this, you take a bit of soil and you try to press it between your fingers, and if you can make a thin layer that sticks on the skin, it indicates the clay content of the soil. So you can go in your garden and check this, and so when you're a bit used to it, you can assess the amount of clay that you have in your soil. And this one has some amount of clay in it. So let's go back just for a minute on Google Earth, where I took the picture. So let me go back to Jingmai main village. Yes, so our house is there, and so I compared soil from maybe this place, you see, at the top of the slope, with soil that I took more down, you know, like around here. And the more you go down the slope, the more clay you will have in the soil. And that's natural, you know. Think of why are the rivers, especially in the tropics, why are they red, especially during the rainy season? Well, it's because when it's raining, so the sand is the big particles in the soil, and the clay is the small particles. And when it's raining, all the clay is more easily washed away than the sand. So that's why as you go down the slope towards the river, you will have a higher and higher amount of clay in the soil, and so you will have the most fertile soil. Well, a clay, since it's smaller, more nutrients can stick to it, so you will have a more sticky soil, which can be harder to work when it's very clay rich, but you have a higher potential yield because you can hold more nutrients in there. And that's why typically the more fertile gardens, the more fertile fields are at the bottom, on the lower slopes near the river. And then when all the stuff gets in the river, the clay gets washed away by the water, and the sand sticks at the bottom. That's why typically at the bottom of the river you have pure sand. And then when you go to the deltas, you know, as the water slows down, the clay can settle. And so that's why, for example, you have very fertile land, and that's why you have big cities close to in the deltas, because they have very fertile soil and can carry a big population. So that's why you have so many people in Bangladesh, in Vietnam, in Guangzhou, in Shanghai. Okay, it's because you have very fertile soil due to the clay. The clay, which might come from Jingmai actually, because this clay from Jingmai eventually will flow in the Mekong River and will end up in Vietnam. But yeah, so when you do the farming, it's important to consider the fertility of your soil. And so, well, you mainly want to grow rice, you know, to eat. So the cereals, the rice, the corn, you want to grow it in the fertile soil, close to the river at lower altitude. And then when you have soils at higher altitude, on which maybe growing rice will not be profitable because you will have too low a yield, then you want to find an alternative crop. So that's where your tea, coffee, cocoa, rubber plantations come into play. And these are typically called cash crops, because you don't consume all of its products, you sell it. So if you were to go to Jingmai maybe 50 years ago, maybe at that time the tea farmers wouldn't say they are tea farmers. They would say they mainly grow rice, and they have these tea gardens as a secondary, maybe cash crop, you know. Now, one of the big questions is, why do they have such a large amount of tea gardens if it's just a secondary crop? It means probably there was a lot of trade at that time between Jingmai and maybe China or Myanmar or the Dai Kingdom. But anyway, let's go back to our pictures. So yeah, I wanted to show you can see a clear difference in soil, and these two samples were taken maybe 500 meters away. Okay, so it's always hard to talk about a place, because there are lots of micro variations, you know, variations due to differences in geography mainly. And so altitude, the difference in altitude is not only a difference of temperature that plays a role. Generally, we say the higher altitude, the lower the temperature, the slower the tea grows and the more fragrant it is. But it's also a difference in fertility depending on where you are on the slope. And that's where you have a difference between tea growing on a big mountain and on a small mountain. Because if you look at some really big mountain, let's go for example to Wuliangshan. Okay, these are quite big mountain. Okay, Wuliangshan here. These are big mountains. And you can see at the top, they don't grow anything because it's too cold and it's just too hard to access. So it's just forest, okay? So it means that your crops will be, for example, there. I don't know what village it is, but let's have a look. You see they seem to have some kind of gardens over there, and here they have paddies. And since these soils are already mid-slope, you can see that all the clay, a lot of clay will flow down from that big mountain there. And so it will make the soil comparatively richer. So you can see here we're at like 2,000 meters of altitude, but it probably grows in a richer soil than the top of Jingmai, which is at 1,600, 1,700. Okay, simply because since you're at the top already, in Jingmai you're at 1,600, you're already at the top, all the clay has been washed away. Okay, and so it will be less fertile than a higher altitude soil located on a really big mountain. So that's why only considering the altitude when looking for good tea, it's only partly relevant, because you also want to look at the soil fertility. And for a good tea, you might want to have not so fertile soil. And I think that's why the tea from Jingmai is pretty good. It's because it's not the highest altitude. The plateau is at 1600, but we're at the top of the mountain. And you can imagine that, like, for millions of years, this soil has been washed away from its clay. So if you go at the top here, it will be pure sand. And as you go down, you will have a gradient of clay concentration, just increasing as you go down towards the river. Okay? And so that's why it makes sense that they have the paddies here at the bottom of the mountain. And as you go up, you will find some natural tea gardens, but those tea gardens were recently implanted. In the past, they would grow maybe corn there. Now, usually close to the village, you will have some gardens for the vegetables. They are close to the village for an easier access. Well, in the case of Jingmai, they actually have a lot of ancient tea gardens there. So I don't know, maybe at some point the village was a bit more below, or but you see, these are questions that are interesting to ask when you're traveling around. Like, if those soils are fertile, why would they grow a tea there and not just only at the top of the mountain? And it might relate to the history. But you can see that in these areas, all the top of the mountain is used for agriculture. Let's go back to our pictures. Yes, so this is, when I travel, I like to look at the roadside, and you can, that way you can see a soil profile. And here what you can see is a slightly darker soil at the top, which is usual, because the organic matter will accumulate, will be generated from the top, okay, from the top of the soil, from the litter. So it's darker at the top, and then you have a different depth of organic matter. Again, you have a gradient, because as it rains, like, some organic matter just flows down, you know, and it kind of dilutes down as you go deeper. The organic matter also, well, is eaten by microorganisms. So the organic matter content, it works like, for example, every year maybe you will lose 10% of the organic matter content. So that's why if you want to nurture the organic matter, it cannot add up forever. Actually, it's always an equilibrium. So you need to add a new source of organic matter every year to make up for what's been eaten by the microorganisms. And as you go down, you see less organic matter. Now in this case, because it's the natural tea gardens, you don't see a very dark soil at the top, but you can see a slight difference in color. And then what we see is that we cannot see the bedrock. It's all soil. So here it's at the top, okay, on the plateau, in the part where they grow the natural tea gardens, and you cannot see the bedrock, which is very common in the tropical soil, in the tropics, because the temperatures are high. All the physical, the weathering process of the rocks goes faster than, for example, if you were in a temperate climate, or in a boreal forest or something. And so a lot of the soil will be created quite fast, which means that the soil is deep, and it can be a problem for the plants, because it means they need deep roots, okay? Because when you put a fertilizer at the top, whether natural or put by the farmer, as it rains, the nutrients will flow down. It's called leaching, okay? So it will flow down and it will be inaccessible, and in the end the nutrients will tend to gather around the bedrock, and it will keep following the bedrock, so the nutrients might go down later on in the slope, and that's also partly what makes the lower slope soils more fertile, because everything, all the fertilizer you put at the top, if it's not been caught up by the plants at the top, it's going to end up running at the bottom. Okay, and so if the roots cannot reach the bedrock, well, they will need to have an extensive network and be able to capture the nutrients. So that's why you have a big competition. They really need a good root system to survive in a tropical soil like this. Now, of course, if you're on the slopes, on some areas you might have the bedrock coming out and having a shallow soil. If you live like around the Mediterranean, for example, the soils are very shallow. You just dig maybe 20 centimeters and you're already at the bedrock. So in that case, the plants will need to have a wider root systems, but you could imagine the nutrients will be more available because they won't go anywhere. They will get stuck on the bedrock. And you can see they have, so this is Nogan New Village, and they have a little dam. I don't know when they built that dam, and I don't really know about its purpose. I know that the lack of water is a constraint of agriculture in Jingmai, and that's one of the reasons why tea is a good option, because tea doesn't require irrigation, while other crops, for example sugarcane in the 90s they had that project of growing sugarcane in Jingmai, and they couldn't grow it in Tappingjiang, so that's why they preserved all the gardens there, because they had no access to irrigation. But in the past there were some areas in Jingmai where they had to cut the ancient tea gardens to make room for growing this sugarcane, and the sugarcane was grown for maybe 5 years, and then since it's high altitude the yields were not so high, so it wasn't profitable. So in the end they scrapped the sugarcane, and they planted new plantations. That was back in the 90s. So maybe actually it has something to do with this dam. Maybe at some point they needed some irrigation for something. Then this is Mongban village. You can see the little pagoda, and you can see the bigger mountains in the back. So Jingmai is definitely not a big mountain. It's kind of surrounded by bigger mountains. Again, all what you see here is mostly ancient tea gardens, and you can see some spots of natural tea gardens there. And an interesting feature of Jingmai is the sea of cloud that you can see. Usually during the rainy season you need a bit of humidity for that, and this is really beautiful. This is due to a thermal inversion. This is because at this point the air in the valley is colder than the air above. Okay, you know, typically the higher you go in altitude, the colder the air. That's how it works on a flat ground. But due to geography, sometimes, like when the sun rises, it heats up some mountains, and if you have a pit like you have here, that will take more time to heat up, and it means that in the morning that pit there, the plains, has a colder air, so you have clouds at the bottom. And then as the sun rises, it just heats up the clouds, so the clouds kind of go up and they are dissipated by noon. This is Jingmai Mountain. They also have really nice tea there. I will probably do a live stream at some point about this area. But yeah, this sea of cloud is really nice. And this is an evening picture from our tea garden as the sun was setting. So you can see these are natural tea gardens, but I will show you pictures of the tea gardens. Okay, so here you can see the paddies, and again this is the Nanlong River that you have that you cannot see here. So the mountain opposite does not belong to Jingmai. This is quite lower altitude. So some families grow rice and also ducks along with the rice. That's a good pairing. No, they don't have to grow rice, you know, because they make good money with the tea, but it's kind of tradition. Some families like to eat their own rice, like my brother-in-law, he makes the rice for a family, so why not? This is also quite at the bottom. Again, you can see some quite recently established tea gardens here, and here is the Nanlong River. So on that day I took a trip down there. I rarely go, and you can see some paddies, but not so much, maybe because the terrain is a bit hard to navigate. The slopes are quite steep at the bottom. This is a view from Mangjing, so what you can see there is Myanmar. I think the big mountains over there must be Myanmar. And you can see again very low population density there, so it's quite interesting that well, you have lots of villages in Jingmai, but then if you go west, population density is very low. And you have some beautiful stuff, like this is a tree which like branches out, and in the middle is the road. So down the picture you have a road on which you can drive by car. This is in Mangjing. So if you have time in your life, just visit Jingmai. This is really a beautiful place. Again, like during the rainy season, you can have really breathtaking sights, but you need to be there at the right time, you know, in the right spot to have beautiful views. And here again you can see Tapingjiang, Mangjing in the back, and over there is probably Myanmar as well. Yeah, so especially in the morning you can have really nice sights, especially during autumn. I'd recommend you visit in autumn. Okay, again we have this rock, another profile. So some interesting things you can see here. The soil is much shallower. You already see the bedrock, and you can see the bedrock is not a strict limit. So here you would have maybe 50 centimeters of soil, which looks different from what we saw earlier. This is at the bottom, and it looks to be more compact. And this is the kind of soil which might have problems with waterlogging. I don't know if it's a real problem. These tea gardens at the bottom of the mountain, let me show you on Google Earth. This picture, so you see as you go here, you have the village, you have some ancient tea gardens there, then you have some paddies, and in between the paddies you also have tea gardens. But these tea gardens were mostly planted around 2007, when the price of tea got really expensive, and it grows on more fertile soil, so you have a higher yield, but that tea doesn't taste as good, and that's why we don't source it. We have some gardens there, and we just sell the fresh leaves mostly. Sometimes we will use them for white tea, or even black tea can be nice, because you can get a nice tasting profile of black tea with weaker leaves. But you can see here those soils are fertile, and they are planted with tea. So it's not ideal for high quality tea, and so that's why if you look at Jingmai tea, it would really depend. Like that Shangtai from the bottom of the mountain, it's really not worth its price in my opinion, because you still pay for the name of Jingmai, but you don't take advantage of the unique terroir, the unique characteristic of Jingmai Mountain. Okay, so that's the job of the tea farmer. Actually, you have to be mindful of these. You have to understand the different areas, the different soil conditions, and where you would get the good tea. Well, generally you will get the best tea where you have the low yield, okay, And these tea trees actually have a high yield. So yeah, thinking about it, waterlogging might not be a really big problem there. It's also a problem you can partially solve by digging trenches around the field to have a drain. But here you can see lots of rocks at the bottom, so it's a shallow soil. And here you can see quite a bigger, a higher concentration of organic matter at the top. Okay, but again you can see still a shallow profile. So yeah, if you have problems with waterlogging, increasing the amount of organic matter is a way to solve the problem, because it will make the soil more spongy, it will hold more water. Okay, so we are done with this slideshow. Let me just check on the comments quickly. Okay, so we've had some connection problems. I'm sorry for that, but I hope in the end it will be fine. So yeah, thank you for watching. Now let me talk about let's go to Tapingzhang, because I think that's why we're here. Okay, this is the largest ancient tea garden in the world. So let me show you some pictures from Tapingzhang. I just need to, yeah, let me do some stuff here. And here we are. So Tapingzhang is really a unique garden, not only because of its size, but also because of its landscape. Generally, when you take pictures in Tapingzhang, it's really a unique landscape. You cannot mistake it for another place. First, because it's relatively flat, okay, so it's very easy to walk around, very easy to visit. I've gathered a collection of pictures here. You have a moderate forest cover in Tapingzhang. As you can see, the tea trees are not particularly big. It's an ancient tea garden. Some sources say it could be 1,800 years old. At least that's the earliest scriptures, like written content talking about tea production in Jingmai. It was found in the temple. I don't know exactly the original source, but 1,800 years is not crazy, you know, because back in the day people were doing agriculture and they were drinking tea, so why not? And if you have that poor soil on a fairly accessible plateau, well, why not grow it there and keep it there? So if you look like 20 years ago, the plantation density was not that high, and a lot of the tea trees are small, partly because with the boom of pu'er tea they planted a lot more tea. They increased the plantation density to produce more tea leaves. Yeah, so some people say it's not a really good deal to buy Jingmai tea, because if you go to Laomana or Hekai, it's mostly big trees in the ancient tea gardens. While in Jingmai, if you don't go for those select, like single tree production with only big trees harvested, you could say that 80% of the tea that's harvested on Tapingzhang comes from smaller trees, you know, something that you wouldn't call gushu, and yet in Jingmai we call that gushu, you know. So you have different naming systems with different mountains. But in the end, I would say it doesn't matter so much. What matters is the taste. Do you get your money's worth in terms of taste? And we also have cows in Tapingzhang. These are remnants of the past. I think there's only 1 or 2 families now who take care of the cows there. But in the past, every family had cows. Why did they have cows? They used them mainly for plowing the rice fields. Okay, like I said, 50 years ago, their main concern was growing rice. They had paddies down the mountain, and at that time they had no access to mechanization. They had to rely on animal force. Okay, so animal strength to do the labor. So they had those cows mainly for plowing the soil and as a secondary source for meat. They don't drink milk at all in those places. And so the cows, they would just park them in Tapingjang because it's easily accessible from the village and it's quite a big area, easy for the cows to walk around, and they can just eat whatever is in the garden. And you could imagine that from the tree's perspective, it's also somewhat a way to help fertilize the tea gardens, because if the cows go somewhere else in the forest to graze, they will go back around the tea trees and naturally fertilize the soil, increase the amount of nutrients. It's still good, I think, that we have cows. At some point they wanted to get rid of the cows, but I think they are really part of the identity of Jingmai Mountain. That's what make Jingmai a nice place, you know. Now, yeah, I just stumbled upon that picture I wanted to show you. So this is a cutting of a dead tree trunk, and as you can see, it's pretty hard to see to count the rings. So a lot of people talk about the age of the tea trees, and they want to get an answer. So I thought maybe we can find a cut tree and try to count the rings, but it doesn't really work that way. You can see that you cannot really count the rings. Now I guess maybe with some lab processing you could make them more visible, but I think a reason is because we don't have a big difference between winter and summer. There is one, but not a clear dormancy period like you'd have in Europe. And we have spiders in the fields, and these spiders are our best friends because they are like the equivalent of our natural pesticides, you could say. They prevent big infestations, they prevent pest invasion. They will weave their nets around the tea trees. So in spring they are not here. They are very tiny in spring, and they will start growing and weaving webs as the rainy season starts. And then the whole garden will be engulfed in those spider webs. And so you have to be careful when you walk around the tea gardens, otherwise you will go through the webs. They are hard to see typically. But those spiders are not so harmful, I think. And they are a really good tool to prevent the pest invasion. So that's partly why we don't need to spray pesticides. We don't have problems with pests. We don't have major problems with pests in that garden. And just like in most ancient tea gardens. The problem now, if you spray pesticides on your garden, the spiders won't come, so you will lose that natural predator benefit. Okay, so you can say in a way that the spiders work for free for the farmers. So that's called ecosystem services. Now you can see some tea trees are badly damaged like this, and in the end that's how the tea trees die. Eventually they will get attacked by some disease, you know, or maybe by ants or termites, things like that, which will degrade the structure, and at some point they will just collapse, or they just won't be able to sustain themselves. And Tapingjang is quite easily accessible. We can go around by motorbikes, so it makes the tea picking very easy. It's not like Iwu where you'd have to walk for 2 hours to get the tea leaves. Here it's very convenient. So it's my job during the spring, well, it's the start of my job. Usually at noon and in the late afternoon, I go to the tea gardens with the motorbike to collect the leaves. And what makes Jingmai unique, the Tappingzhang unique, is really that landscape. It's a collection of the flat surface and then lots of trees. Like you have a fairly dense forest cover compared to other ancient tea gardens. Even like if you go to Hekai, for example, the forest cover is not as dense as here, and you can have really big trees in Tappingzhang. So this is the main road in Tappingzhang. You cannot go by car, only by motorbike there. And you can see on the bark of the tea trees you have lots of lichen. So in a way, the lichen, they do photosynthesis, but they also eat some stuff in the trees. Some say it's an indication of an old tree. In the end, we don't really know, because even the bigger trees in Jingmai are not that big, but it doesn't mean they are young. Because Jingmai has a medium small leaf varietal, so naturally they don't grow as fast as the tea trees, for example, in southern Monghai, like Laobanzang or Laomana. They grow quite slowly. And also on Tappingzhang you have low temperatures. That's also a thing, the microclimate. Yeah, that's something unique. As you go up on the plateau, you can feel a difference in temperature. It's much colder on the plateau at all time of the day. So also all these parasitic plants and those lichens on the tea trees could be an indication that the tea tree is old. Because apparently those things take some time to settle on the tea trees. I don't know how good a method it is to assess the age of the tea trees though. And you can see that the tea leaves have some damage. So that's also in a way a clue when pesticides are used. For example, in the most intensive plantations, the tea trees will have very beautiful leaves. You will have no signs of pest attacks. While if you go to kind of organically managed tea plantations, you will see a lot of damage on the tea leaves. Now, this damage, it doesn't necessarily limit the yield, because the tea trees can take some punishment actually without before having a real impact on the amount of tea that is grown. We only harvest the young leaves, so the young leaves they are not damaged by the insects, okay? Because they have a high concentration in polyphenols. This is chemical defenses. Typically, the insects will damage the mature leaves, so it will only limit the photosynthesis ability of the tea trees. But if you keep a good amount of leaves on the tea trees, that's fine. That's where you need to be careful not to over harvest. If you over harvest the tea trees, then it won't have enough leaves available for photosynthesis. So when you pick the flush, it's good practice to leave one leaf on the flush you pick. You can also skip a flush. So that's what we do in Jingmai, in Tappingzhang now. We just don't harvest the summer tea because it doesn't taste so good, and it's better to give that flush for the tea trees to have more leaves and potentially have a higher yield actually in spring when the tea is expensive. Now it's hard to take good pictures of Tappingzhang, because what you see mostly is a mess of green stuff, you know. When you're there and see it with your eyes, it's really beautiful, but it's hard to take. That's why I take a lot of individual trees in picture, but it's really hard to get a good angle on what the general garden looks like. So that's why you have to come to Jingmai. It's really a beautiful place to walk in, and it changes along the seasons. This was taken in summer, you know, because it's very green generally. Grow tall quite fast, okay? But you won't be able to climb on it because the tree trunk is not thick enough, okay? So when the tea tree is old enough, then you can climb on the tree. And that's when, during the pruning, you will try to divide it into several branches so that you will have a platform on which you can stand, let it grow, and then you can do that again as it gets older. Actually, you can make secondary platforms in the upper parts of the tea tree. And this is quite an average picture, like the average size of the tea trees. So you can see these tea trees are not really big, still slightly bigger than the natural tea gardens, but not so big. They have to be harvestable, so even the ancient tea gardens, the ancient tea trees are pruned regularly, otherwise the branches will be unreachable, and so you won't be able to do anything with your tea. In some areas you have only small trees. I was told it's because at some point you had lots of cows and they would gather in an area, and so that area, like the tea trees, got destroyed by the cows, so they replanted it recently. Some other places it's because of the cold. Some places are particularly cold, and if you have a bad year with some frost, well, all the tea trees will die in a given area. So you see, we talk about Jingmai tea, but the problem when you talk about the terroir, for example, it's a general idea, but if you dig in the detail of the terroir, you will have different spots, and different gardens will give you different taste. That's why every year we like to release some single garden tea, because then you're tasting the geographical conditions of a given garden, and that's interesting. And I think for that, Jingmai, or maybe it's because we're more familiar with Jingmai, we've had more examples of Jingmai tea, but you have lots of different tastes in Jingmai tea. And Tapinjang, we talk about Tapinjang, but in oh, okay, I'm back at the beginning. Yeah, so we talk about Tapinjang, but in the Dai language, they separate this they separate this area into maybe 12 different sections. Okay, they give different garden names like Aiban, Mango, Ongbo, Noguwan, and we try to focus on this kind of thing. Okay, let me just check if the live stream is going well. So if I see the connection is too bad, anyway, I'm recording this thing on my computer, so I always have the option to just re-upload a clean version if we have cuts. So yeah, thank you for watching. Let me talk a bit about the taste of Jingmai tea. I really like Jingmai tea because it's a very balanced tea. It gets everything that you're looking for in a pu'er tea. It's not really a soft tea like Iwu or Jingu tea would be, nor is it an aggressive tea like Monghai tea. It's in the middle, okay? In a way, yesterday we did Mongsong, and Mongsong is also like halfway between soft and aggressive. Jingmai maybe is a bit softer than Mongsong. It has quite a unique fragrance, especially tea from Tapinjang. Tea from Tapinjang will have, we say, an orchid fragrance maybe. What is sure is when trying Jingmai tea, Tapinjang tea is really the thing you need to try in Jingmai. We have ancient tea gardens in other places than Tapinjang, but For our gulan cake, for example, and even for this autumn tea, we only source tea from Tappingjiang because this is the characteristic taste of Jingmai with the orchid fragrance. Then, depending on the place in Tappingjiang, you can also have some bitterness. If you go to Mongban, for example, Mongban or so Tappingjiang is here, okay? But if you go east, these ancient tea gardens shared between Mangang and Mongban, they tend to have a more bitter characteristic and maybe less fragrance, but they're also nice. You could also imagine doing a blend actually of different places in Jingmai, but we do mainly Tappingjiang. Tappingjiang in itself is already a blend where when we source the tea, we source it, we name it according to each garden in its name, and then at the end of the harvest, we take out some like special tasting teas which we'll release as single garden tea, and then we blend the rest, or at least if there's no problem, we taste each batch. If there's a problem, we take it apart. But if there's no problem, we blend all the other batches into our gulan cake. So that's why it's like a general blend. Now, this tea also, the autumn tea is also a general blend of Tappingjiang material. And yeah, this gives a pretty consistent Jingmai profile. So you can have some bitterness. I think some bitterness is expected in Jingmai tea. And on the market, a lot of Jingmai tea you can drink. I don't know where they get it, actually. Or maybe it's not pure Gushu, I don't know, because I feel most of the Gushu in Jingmai has some bitterness. Or at least if you make a blend of different gardens. Some gardens might have very low bitterness. But yeah, mostly on Tappingjiang you have a light bitterness, akin to the Laomano bitterness, but less powerful and very fast changing. It doesn't linger on the mouth. Jingmai tea is highly astringent. That's also a characteristic, and some people really don't like astringency. I've gotten used to it, I guess, by drinking so much Jingmai tea. I don't find this astringency really a bad trait in Jingmai tea. I always feel the congruence of bitterness and astringency and fragrance make that minerality, you know, that feel of sucking on a rock, which I like to have, yeah, in Jingmai tea. That minerality feel is very prevalent in Mongsong tea, but you also have it in Jingmai. Jingmai is a bit softer than Mongsong. It's a bit more full-bodied, especially if you go for the big trees, for example, you'll have a really good chachi in Jingmai tea. It will make you feel a bit high. Not as powerful as Iwu tea or Laobanzang tea, but still quite nice. So that's the thing. It's really pu'er tea. You get a bit of everything that you could expect in a pu'er tea. And that's why some people would say Jingmai tea is a tea for beginners. But in my opinion, not for beginners only, because I've had tea for quite some time, and yet I enjoy having that Jingmai profile, you know. The main characteristic, the typicity, might be really the orchid fragrance. But then again, it would depend on how you process it, because depending on your shaching, depending on how strong you cook the tea, you can bring out different aspects of the fragrance. You know, it's a bit like retouching the white balance when you retouch a picture. It's the same picture, but you can get a different mood. Personally, we like to process our teas on the greener side. You can see even this autumn tea. Well, here the leaves are quite dark green and also a bit yellow. Not so much in this tea, interestingly. But even for the autumn, we try to give a long shaching a long cooking session in the wok with a lot of steaming. The steaming helps preserve the water content in the batch. When you get those autumn leaves, they tend to have a low water content. And so if you have a low water content, if you keep flipping, you will lose all the water. You won't be able to give it like 20-25 minutes of cooking time. If you want to give that long a time when cooking tea, you need to preserve the water content in the batch. And for that, you need to do some steaming to have well-cooked tea. A downside of that is that you get a lot of yellow flakes. Like last week, I was in Jingmai just sorting our last batch of tea. I went to the factory to sort out the yellow flakes, and and there were lots of them. But it's not a problem because in the end we get good autumn tea. That's what matters. And I know you also enjoy our cakes of yellow flakes, so that's fine. And interestingly, if you do a good job with the processing, I think the autumn tea is also very nice for Jingmai. And it comes at a much lower price than the spring tea, so it's also a good option. I know some people tend to look down upon Jingmai tea. For example, if you go to Jingmai, if you go to Monghai, typically they don't like Jingmai tea. They will say it's too weak. No, of course it's a bit of chauvinism, you know. Every place, if you go to Yiwu, they will tell you that Monghai tea is not proper pu'er tea and everything. But it's definitely a unique terroir, I would say, Jingmai, because you cannot really compare it. I think you can imitate maybe the taste of Jingmai through blending. And in a way, yeah, Jingmai tea, yeah, it's definitely one of the places you need to have in your tea encyclopedia, I would say. It's not Monghai area, it's not Linsang area, it's really Jingmai. But I agree that it's a beginner's tea, because it has a bit of everything you have that's good in pu'er tea. Yeah. Okay, let me show you some more pictures, okay? Because you've seen Tapingzhang, that's the unique thing. Let's go back on Google Earth. So you see, this is like the largest ancient tea garden. Just to finish on the taste, if we go to Mangjing, I would say you have two main profiles. If you go beyond the diversity between the small plots, okay, you have two main profiles. You have the profile from all this area, the Dai area, which is more on the softer side with the good fragrance, decent sweetness, medium thickness, and light bitterness sometimes. And then you go to Mangjing, which Mangjing has a more Monghai-like profile actually. And it's interesting because the leaves are a bit smaller. And when I talk about Mangjing tea, I talk about proper Mangjing tea. Mangjing tea from those two little hills above the village. This is called Ailangshan. Okay, so if you go to Mangjing and want good tea, go look for Ailangshan tea. And the leaves there are much smaller. Well, they are smaller if you take them side by side with material from Tapingzhang. You will find that the leaves in Ailangshan look greener and are smaller, so it might be a different varietal. And it's more like Monghai tea. You have a stronger bitterness and astringency. You don't really have that typical orchid fragrance, and it's less soft. It's also slightly cheaper, but you can have really good tea. Like if you're really a Monghai tea lover, you might prefer Mangjing tea over Tapingzhang tea. But if you look at the Cha tea, I would still say like Tapingzhang tea is the more powerful tea. If you look at the history, actually, it is said that the Bulang people first settled in Jingmai, and so the Bulang people established the big tea gardens in Jingmai. And then something like 600 years ago, the Dai somehow invaded the area and the Bulang went to Mangjing. Now it's really hard to know about the history of this place because there are no really reliable written records. There are many legends. I guess the best bet is looking at the temple, or even better if you could have access to some accounting archives of like ancient China, where maybe they might have some like customs office where they would mark some tea trading and stuff, because like Jingmai was connected to what they called the Tea Horse Road, so it was a network of roads which connected all the tea mountains with then Monghai and Pu'er City, and then which went to Tibet, went to Guangdong, Beijing, and there were some customs office. You had to pay a duty on tea, so I guess somehow they had statistics, but maybe those statistics were not down to the mountain of origin. So it's really hard to know what happened in these places. Well, for example, the village of Nanzhou, and there, it's very small. No, it's not Nanzhou here. Let me find that village. The village of Nanzhou, which is Hua, they were settled there. So this is Nogan. We keep going northwest, and this is the village of Nanzhou. It's very small. Only maybe less than 100 people live there, and they were kind of hunter-gatherers, as I understand, or maybe not hunter-gatherers, but doing slash-and-burn agriculture, and they were taken from somewhere else, and they were just put by the government in that village. I guess that was at the beginning of the communist era, probably. Maybe in a way maybe they were some kind of war refugees as well. Need to do more interviews to know more about this. And so yeah, they don't have a long history in Jingmai. And I don't know about the Hani village, for example. What you can see is the roots. The roots of Jingmai lie in the Bulang and the Dai culture. Okay, and it's the Dai and the Bulang who have the ancient tea gardens. Those other like the Han, the Hua, the Hani, they don't have. Yeah, they don't have almost any ancient tea garden. Now, from the 90s on, let me just prepare the pictures. Oh yeah, first maybe you want to have a look at the village. Let's show you what the villages look like. So this is Lao Jiufang. This is the Han village. I think they make nice black tea there, but they only have natural tea gardens. So and it's generally lower altitude, so they don't have really good material, unfortunately for them. I don't know why they settled there. Lao Jiufang means like the alcohol village. So I don't know, maybe the Han settled there to offer services to other villages, and maybe they brewed alcohol or something. This is an old picture. This is from 2010. So this is Jingmai main village back in 2010. One of the first pictures I took on Jingmai, and you can see at the time they all had those traditional Dai houses with 2 floors, usually the farming tools and the animals on the first floor, and the living room and small bedrooms on the second floor. This is also from 2010. This is the old village of Nogan. Since then it's been kind of preserved and rebuilt. Preserved in a Chinese way. Preserved in a Chinese way means basically you kind of destroy the houses and rebuild them in the old style, but maybe with more modern construction techniques. But this is how it looked before it was rebuilt. And yeah, let me talk a bit about the tradition. So it's a dye village. So this is a picture from the Water Splash Festival. We don't celebrate, we don't do really big celebration for this festival because it's in the middle of it's the peak of the spring harvest season. But usually people take 2 or 3 days off. And that's a good opportunity actually to get good leaves for cheap because the factories don't work. But still some like migrant workers might still pick tea, and just during this festival you can get the leaves for slightly cheaper, and the weather is still good. It kind of, the Water Splash Festival in Jingmai marks the end of the early spring season. Okay, so at this time that's when the price of tea goes up until the Water Splash Festival, and then it's like cut by half. But there can be like 1 or 2 weeks during which the price has been cut already, but you still have good weather, and so you can still make good tea. So this can be good price for value. So this is some festivities on the square. So a lot of the village life on Jingmai relies around this temple and the square attached to the temple, and you get a nice view. So in the background you have Jingmai Mountain, and the city of Lancang is in the left, maybe 50 kilometers away. This is like some bigger, fancier houses, you know, but which still are kind of built in the Dai style, or at least they can try to cover it, you know, with wood and stuff. That's how they renovated the villages, because as people made money with the tea sales, the first thing they wanted was to have bigger houses. Okay, and so they built those like kind of ugly concrete houses, which you find all over Xishuangbanna. But then you had this UNESCO World Heritage application, and the government wanted to preserve kind of a beautiful scenic villages, traditional Dai villages. So this is kind of a compromise that they found. And the result can be quite good. You can have some pretty fancy houses in the Dai style. This is the rebuilt village of Nogan. So this was taken maybe last year, this picture. It looks okay actually. I was a bit sad like back in 2018 because they had just rebuilt it and it looked really brand new. But now, you know, the roofs have gathered some moss and some wear and tear. And now it doesn't look so bad actually. Huh? I think it's actually a pretty good place to visit, Jingmai, even if you're not into tea. No, I guess if you're not into tea, you're not watching this video anyway. But come for the tea and for the landscape. This Nogan old village is quite a pleasant town for a day trip. And this is Jingmai main village in probably last year as well. You can see the temple on the left. And now people have big houses, and our village is quite cramped now because there used to be a lot of space between the houses, but since everyone wants to have like 400 square meters houses, okay, like 5,000 square feet, now we don't have lots of room in the village. But in a way, we kind of need that space first to have a decent factory. Especially, you can see the roofs are used for the drying mats. And second, you want to, some people build guest houses, not so much in Jingmai main village, but they want some rooms to host the migrant workers. We rely a lot, especially in spring, we rely on migrant workforce to harvest the tea gardens, because we have too many tea gardens now. Yeah, so this is the town center of Jingmai. During the spring, it's very lively. You can even have traffic jams in the village. Now, like I was there last week, and it's very quiet. Winter is a great time actually to visit the tea garden. And you can see down there, it's all the migrant workers like waiting for something or hanging out. Yeah, this is from another angle near our house. Our house is back on the right side of this picture. So yeah, pretty big houses, huh? And this is what they call the heart of the village heart. So this is each Dai village will have such a structure, and that will be the real center of the village. Typically the temple is nearby, and yeah, this picture was taken during the offering to Buddha celebration. So this is typically a 3-day long celebration, but more 1 week in practice, where they invite the whole village to eat and have fun. Like it's a week-long party with maybe 3 days of more intense Buddhist celebrations in the temple and in the village heart and stuff like that. Actually, with the development, you could say that people in Jingmai have more time and more money to spend on their traditions. So that's why these offerings to Buddha or the festivals, they tend to be bigger now than they were in the past, just because well, people can afford to spend time and money for this, and they really like that. So I'm not really worried about the Dai culture disappearing, because in the villages it's going very strong. And so buying expensive tea, it's also a way to support this kind of cultural events. You know, back in the day, people were just busy and tired working in the fields, and yeah, they didn't have such elaborate festivities. This is probably Wangji village, I think. This is a Bulang village, which is also quite preserved or like rebuilt. It's actually quite pleasant to live in that kind of houses, and they have lots of guest houses like this nowadays. Oh, this is Nogan Old Village again. This is another celebration. Yeah, this was also during offerings to Buddha, and this is the Pipa ghost. So the Pipa ghost will come. So it's usually young men in the village who have to decorate their mask themselves, and they will come and collect money, and they are kind of the bad omen, the bad ghost, and you just give them money to keep them away. So they will come and harass you, and you just give them a couple of yuans, and they will go away. So it's a way to have the bad luck go away. And of course the money goes to the monks and stuff. Pretty funny. It's quite fun to attend those festivities. And in the evening of those festivals, we like to build those fire flowers. So it's like an inverted rocket. You just take a big bamboo tube, you fill it with a mix of gunpowder and sand, I guess, and you just light it on fire. So it's quite a technique to build a good one, which will sprout up in the sky, and they can go pretty high actually. There are accidents sometimes, but it's a lot of fun. Yeah, so actually the government did an okay job at renovating the village, and it doesn't look as bad, you could say, in terms of architecture as the villages in Xishuangbanna. So in a way, they can both have comfortable and big houses, and also it looks somewhat traditional. I feel sometimes there's a kind of steampunk atmosphere in Jingmai, because you have pipes running everywhere and a mix of wood and steel pipes going everywhere. So And this is Mongban, I think, from a nice. You have lots of nice spots, so it's really a good lifestyle. And you know, those people in Jingmai, they're not interested in going to work in the city, for example. So the great thing, the development of poor tea of the poor tea business is really a good thing for the ethnic minority culture and for the village life, you know, because in lots of poor rural areas, you have no village life. And well, you know, the same happened in Europe, for example. The villages in Europe used to be more populated, and then after World War II, young people would go to the cities to find work, and the villages got depopulated, and only old people stayed in the villages, and just a couple of young people bought back the land of all the other people who went to the city, and that's why now we have a very low population density in the countryside in Europe, and farmers have big plots of land. And with the tea agriculture, it's not the case in these places, because young people want to stay in Jingmai. They might go to university or might go in the city for a while. Like, you have some professional live streamers. They are both like tea farmers and live streamers. Now, I'm not talking about me, but like live streamers on TikTok who just process tea and do live stream and sell their tea that way. So it's a new generation of they are both farmers and business people, and it's very interesting. It's a bit like the wine trade in a way, you know. This is maybe 2016, the old temple, but it hasn't changed so much. But we have two temples, like the big one is the new one built in the 90s, and this one on the left is actually very old. I've heard it could be like 100 years old or something. One day I met a guy from Poland, I think, who was walking around Jingmai, and he was an ethnologist, and he was studying the religious buildings in Southeast Asia, and he was quite impressed by this temple in Jingmai. Yeah, okay, so that slideshow is over. Okay, so yeah, feel free to leave comments. Thank you very much for all the comments. Now it's a bit overwhelming. So do I have another favorite location outside of Jingmai? I would say Bulangshan. I really love the vibe in Bulangshan. It has something mystical, but it's also quite a wealthy, you could say, tea area. So you also have the good lifestyle like we have in Jingmai, you know. I'd recommend you also visit Bulangshan. And the tea I recommend to get high on, maybe, I think the Iwu tea generally has gotten me really high, but they are very expensive, you know, like Tianmenshan, Wangong, Chawangsu, all those teas growing in eastern Iwu. I don't trade that tea because, yeah, I feel they are just too expensive in my opinion. But for example, in our collection, you have the Aonema. Actually, you can get pretty high for pretty cheap. Now, I don't want to go on that road, of course, because then people will say it's too much bullshit or something. But you can sample, you know. Even the Gulan, actually, the Jingmai Gulan sometimes carries me through the day, you know. So, how often do I drink Huangpian? Not so often, honestly. I'm not really a big Huangpian drinker. I guess they are good grandpa style, but I prefer white tea if I go for this kind of stuff. Source material to read about the history of trading. Well, if you read French, I had that book that I recommended in one of my former live stream. It's an explorer who traveled in Xishuangbanna like 100 years ago. I don't really have the name in my mind now. Then you don't have that many books. You have a great book about Jingmai. It's called, it's more like an academic paper, and it's called, the author is Po Yi-hong. Maybe I can just find it on Google. And it's called, I will just paste a link of that book. It's about the landscape. Okay, I just have a quick link that I will post here. This is a very interesting book about what happened in Jingmai about 20 years ago during the development of the poor tea trade. So Jingmai is not part of Xishuangbanna. It's not part of Monghai. It's part of Lansang. But it's interesting you ask the question because it was part of Xishuangbanna maybe before the communist era. I think with the communism they redrew the borders within China. But if you go to Jingmai, it's really more like Xishuangbanna vibe, you know, than Chinese vibe. You can see it's right at the border with Xishuangbanna. Okay, it's here, and here you have Mongman, which is in Xishuangbanna. Yeah, actually, the border with Xishuangbanna is here, and it belonged, I think, to Monghai decades ago. Okay, now I think I will need to finish this live session soon. I have a last slideshow I would like to show you, and this is about the natural tea gardens, because I've showed you Taxinjiang, and now let's just go back to Google Earth. If we look at Jingmai, so you can see these are the ancient tea gardens here, and then on the west of that you have really big surfaces of tea plantations. These tea plantations were developed mostly in the 90s. Okay, before the 90s they had this place here. These are older plantations. They were developed as early as the 60s, I think, and they were experimental modern tea plantations. So like 50-60 years ago, the main way of growing tea was the ancient tea garden design, but it has a low yield. And you know, in the 90s it was the Deng Xiaoping era, the modernization of China, and at that time China was going through its green revolution. The green revolution we went through too in the West after World War II. Okay, well, for China it took a longer time because of communism and stuff. So it started in the 90s, and in Jingmai and in many mountains in southern Yunnan, it consisted in replacing the ancient tea garden cultivation by modern plantations. Let me show you pictures because we've seen enough of those stuff. So they planted, they used like the Indian style plantation, you know, intensive plantation with chemical fertilizer, heavy reliance on pesticides, and even growth promoters to make the tea grow faster. Heavy pruning, so you prune twice a year and you get a very high yield that way. And I think their plan was to make green tea, which was the main tea consumed in China at that time. And so they did that during the 90s. They had a high yield. Then you have the increase in price of pu'er tea in the mid 2000s. and people, a change in the consumer demand. At that time, people are tea enthusiasts, okay? They want tea that tastes good. And that was not the case with that taidisa, that plantation tea with an intensive model of production. So suddenly you had, like let's say in 2010, you had the gushu, which was highly valuable, but with very low yield. And then most of the tea was made by plantations, intensive plantations, but the price of the plantation tea would not increase because the tea enthusiasts didn't want that tea. So they could only use it for cheap cakes, try to make blends with it, and write poor. But and at that time, we also had the environmental issues. So people started, both the government and consumers, started being concerned about the heavy use of pesticides. So to address these issues, especially in the famous tea mountains, the tea mountains which had significant amounts of ancient tea gardens, they got famous around 2010. So you had Jingmai, Laoman, Yiwu, Nanoshan, okay, these places we know now. They decided to convert their intensive plantations into natural tea gardens. And it implied a drastic change in garden design, okay? Because before you had a very high plantation density. Basically, you had a carpet of leaves. And so I think in the pictures you will see. Now you can see here it's still fairly heavy, a fairly heavy plantation density. This is our garden, I think. This is Liu-Dui. But there they planted shade trees. One of the changes they made is they planted shade trees. You can see this is pruning. This is also our Liu-Dui garden. So we prune the tea gardens sometimes. If you do intensive management, you will do that every 6 months. That way, the tea will grow back, and you'll have lots of buds, okay, and a lot of lateral growth. So instead of growing tall, your tea trees will try to spread out, and so that will mean that's how you get a carpet of leaves, okay, in your intensive plantation. Now, yeah, on this plot, it's part of our garden in Liu-Dui, and this was taken maybe 5 years ago. Yeah, they gave it a heavy pruning. I didn't really like it. I preferred when they kept the. I don't know why that stuff is blinking. I'm going to turn it off. Yeah. Sometimes we use that style of pruning, but quite rarely nowadays. And actually, I went there a couple of days ago, and it's been like 5 years since then. Now the trees have grown really tall, and we need to prune them again. But we will prune them in a different way, with a light pruning. You can see, if you prune tea that way, with a heavy pruning, you will get tea trees that look like this, okay? So maybe these tea trees were pruned like that maybe 2 years ago, okay? They grow back quite fast, okay? After you prune like this, after maybe 1 month, you will be able to harvest the tea. Actually, you will have new sprouts, and it will be thicker and thicker as time passes. Now, these plantations, you want to be able to harvest them pretty fast, so you want to keep them at a decent size. So if you have intensive plantations, the best is to make a carpet. That way you have all the leaves laid on a table. That's called a picking table, actually. And that way you can harvest tea very fast, okay? Now we do natural tea gardens. You can see that it's not a carpet of leaves. There is a lot of room between the tea trees. This has several purposes. One is the roots of each tea tree can grow a bit wider, but overall you have less roots. So it means you have less demand for nutrients from the soil. because the plan with the natural tea garden is you stop fertilizing, you stop using chemical fertilizer. Now, if you have too high a demand, too high a yield per surface, then very quickly you're going to lack of nutrients in the soil. So one way to reduce the yield and reduce the demand for nutrients is just to reduce the amount of tea trees you have in your garden. Second, it helps in mitigating pest and disease propagation. We saw earlier that the spiders, they help in mitigating pest invasions. The problem is in an open field like this, they don't really like to settle down. They like to have some shade. So that's why if you have shade trees, the spiders will settle. But in that kind of open field, you cannot really rely on the spiders to protect from pest invasion. So what you can do is just have space between the tea trees. That way it will take longer, it will be harder for the pest to jump from one tree to another. And same goes for disease. So it mitigates. These tea trees will always take some damage from pest and disease. But through the garden design, you can mitigate it enough so that you can just tolerate the damage and not do anything, not doing actively anything about it. Yeah, this is some older pictures. I would say nowadays the forest cover is a bit bigger. This might be from 2016. But you see at this time already they had planted more trees. So it's always good to have that kind of biodiversity. You will also have birds flying around which will eat some of the bigger bugs. And yeah, generally you want to have different species of trees in your garden. That way it will host different kinds of insects. And as a rule of thumb, the more species you have in your ecosystem, and the more stable, the more resilient it will be. Resilience is the key. You have an invader that comes, and the resilience of the ecosystem is its capacity to just to deal with the invasion. Now let's say if you have 100 different species of insects in that garden, and you introduce one foreign species, well, it's more likely that among these 100 species, one of them will be really good at fighting the insect, you know. You will have a natural dynamic. If you have lots of those foreign insects, their predator will thrive on the insects, and so will grow bigger in numbers, and then it will just have it will eliminate the invasion. It will stabilize the ecosystem. You can think of it a bit like the immune system, you could say, where you'd have, well, I don't know if it's a relevant comparison, but yeah, you want to have a high biodiversity to have a more stable ecosystem and deal with any potential invasion. So we have a big surface of those kind of natural tea gardens. In terms of surface, it's about half-half between the ancient tea gardens and the natural tea gardens. In terms of production, it's probably 2/3. So overall, Jingmai, I've heard, produces 1,000 tons of tea in a typical year, 300 tons of gushu, like from the ancient tea gardens, and 700 tons from the natural tea gardens. So that's the ratio. So of course you still have a higher yield in the natural tea gardens. So you have different levels of biodiversity. Some natural tea gardens are forested. Most of them don't have a very heavy forest cover. So we call them shade trees, but their main purpose is probably not the shade. Main purpose is more like stabilizing the soil and bringing biodiversity. That's really important. We also have cherry trees in Jingmai. Yeah, I went last week. They are all in flower like this, so that's a pretty sight. But generally the farmers don't like them because the tea trees that grow around those cherry trees tend to have a poor yield. You can see my wife trying to pick some flowers there. And you can see this is a picture I took in 2016. So a problem that occurred with the growth of the poor tea business is that people tried to expand their tea gardens. Now, some people have forests, like natural forests, and they sneakily, planted tea trees in the forest. And when your tea trees are a decent size, you just cut the forest. But I remember around the 2016, the government cracked down on this. And several people went to jail actually because of that. Well, which I think is, we need to protect the environment, and that's a heavy-handed approach, but in a way, it can be hard sometimes to do policing in those areas because, a lot of people don't really care about the government, but some things are still important, and we really need to protect the forest. And I think since then, actually, they just cut the trees there, and they had to replant the forest. It's important to protect the forest. That's one governance problem. It's because everything is decided by the government, by the upper echelons of the government, and so as a farmer, you cannot only do things sneakily, like you always have to abide by what the government says, but if the government doesn't know, you can do whatever you want. So in the end, it's not the best management technique because sometimes the government policies, they don't really make sense on the field, and sometimes the farmers are also used to not abiding by the law, not following the policies. So I always, when I'm invited to those official meetings and stuff, I always try to push for the creation of a tea producer syndicate in Jingmai, because that's usually how things are managed in the West. You have syndicates, so the tea producers would gather, maybe weekly or monthly, and decide together on those policies. That way you wouldn't really need to involve, have people go to jail or pay big fines. You would have a policing between the tea producers in order to protect the name and the reputation of Jingmai. And I think it would work better. But of course, it's not a favored approach in China because it's a counterweight to the power of the government. The Communist Party likes to be involved in every aspect of life, even if it cannot. So you kind of try to just avoid them, and do whatever you want. But you still have some examples of syndicates of producers, unions working in China. So it's still possible actually to create one. So it's complicated to work in an authoritarian government because I think generally it's not as bad as Western media would want to. Of course, the thing they describe in the Western media is surely true, but it's maybe the worst side we see, and they won't really make a documentary on like the boring administration of a village or something like that. But it's interesting to look at these issues, and I know a lot of officials here, and those officials also understand the problem, but it's just how the system works, and it's really hard to change the system. This is an example of a deforested area where they would plant tea. So they cracked down on this, and now we have the forest police, which patrols, and they use drones and stuff to make sure. This is an empty bottle of glyphosate. So glyphosate was used. This was back in 2016 or 17 again, because people often ask me the question, do we use pesticides in Jingmai? And when I started, like in 2016, it was still common, especially for the gardens far from the roads, for the farmers to use glyphosate to clear the weeds, because it's just more convenient, it's faster, less workforce required than just using mechanical tools. But there's the government is opposed to it, so that's one thing. But as we said, the government doesn't see everything. But the problem is the customers are also opposed to it, you know. So, and when I source tea from my customers, I don't want to source tea from gardens sprayed with glyphosate. So in the end, you don't. There might be some use, you know, by some people, but I haven't seen it in years, really, because we know that if we know that this guy uses a glyphosate in his garden, we won't buy the tea from this guy, you know. And in a way, we know it also hurts the reputation of the village and everything. I remember years ago, like Mahé in Iwu took a prestige hit because there was a rumor at some point that they used glyphosate and they used pesticides in their ancient tea gardens. And true or not, that's what people said in the tea markets. And so for some time the price of Mahé tea decreased. People weren't too kind of on buying. Now since then it's been forgotten. But this was an issue maybe back in 2016 at that time, but now it's been solved. We haven't had this for a long time. So before the COVID pandemic, we relied a lot on the Burmese workers. They came, you know, from these really bad places, and you hear about these places in the news nowadays. They're in a rebel area. It's controlled by the ethnic group armies, and they are at war with the government. So we had lots of migrant workers coming from these war-torn areas to work in Jingmai. And it was a good deal for both parties, because we could get them for slightly cheaper than the local workforce. We gave them maybe $10 a day, but it was usually long-term contract. They would stay for maybe 3 or 4 months in your farm. Actually, they didn't want to leave, you know, because so we were very busy. Like in spring, you're very busy, so they have lots of work to do until the rainy season comes. And at that time, you don't really need that many workers. So slowly you want them to leave, but in a way they also want to stay and keep working. But yeah, generally they leave by midsummer. So it was good because they could go back to their home with good money, and we had that reliable workforce for clearing the weeds and picking tea and stuff. But since COVID, they had a crackdown on this, because they were, you could say, illegal migrants. They didn't come on a visa, they were smuggled in. And then they went back through like some kind of smugglers. Well, it's not like big trafficking, like they had to pay maybe $100 just to get smuggled from their village and to find a job, because the smuggler would get them a job also in different places. So Jingmai is just one of those places. And then you'd give them like $10, and then you feed them and you house them. So at the end of the season, they could go back home with good money. But yeah, since COVID, it's not possible anymore. Now the borders are more tightly controlled, and we just don't have any illegal migrants. Of course, at the time the police knew about that, but everyone was happy, you know, because those guys didn't cause trouble. They worked well for the economy of Jingmai and stuff. But then with COVID, you know, you had, and the more like strong China policy, they closed the border more tightly. So now we rely on people from the valley, and yeah, it also works well. But sometimes we can have more workforce issues than we had before. Now, since the Burmese cannot come, it's more common for the tea farmers to go clear the weeds themselves. It's true that, like before COVID, we all got a bit lazy and had the Burmese workers do a lot of the job. Yeah, so lots and lots of tea gardens. You can see this might be an older picture, and this is a similar area, maybe 5 or 6 years later. They have overall increased the forest cover. You wouldn't consider them proper shade trees. In reality, the shade effect is not that strong. It's more about the biodiversity, I would say. And yeah. So the pruning, we try to keep them at 2 meters high. This is one of our garden, the Liudui garden. We try to keep them at 2 meters high so that it can be reached. All the tea can be reached without trouble. And I visited my garden last week, and we'll need to do some pruning because it's grown really big. But this time I will make sure they prune it more in a bullet shape. Overall, it's pruned once every 3 years maybe. And you also have some variation, but the difference in taste can be pretty huge actually depending on the soil type. That's why in our garden, for our Jingmai Miyun, for example, we only source a tea from this area, from the plateau. Okay, it's the same altitude as Tapingjiang, and all this tea is pretty good. Actually, even in the other villages, that Jingmai Village natural tea garden is so good that all those farmers from Mangjing, you see, I see them because my garden is over there. They are waiting there on this road, and they are buying tea, and they will resell it as Mangjing ancient garden tea. I know they do that because that tea is so good. Actually, it can pass as Mangjing Gusu, apparently. And of course, it can also be common, for some farmers to try to sell tea from the natural tea gardens as ancient tree material. Now in spring, if it's the fresh leaves, it's quite easy to see the difference. The ancient tea garden material is greener. It has a darker green, has more chlorophyll because it has a heavier shade. But in autumn it's not so easy. So in autumn it's better to only buy leaves from people you trust. And then of course for the bigger factories it's also very common for them to blend some natural tea garden in their with their ancient tea production. So even in Jingmai, like the bigger producers, I know it's common that just to lower the costs, they will add maybe 20-30% of small of plantation tea leaves in their Gushu blend. Maybe that will be a topic for another day. But okay, I've been streaming for quite a long time now, so maybe it's a good time to put an end to that live stream. I hope the quality was good. If not, I might re-upload it. Okay, so yeah, that's about it. I hope you enjoyed these things about Jingmai. It wasn't that concise, unfortunately, but I hope you've learned some things during this live stream. Okay, so thank you for watching. Oh, and I forgot to say, but we give a 15% discount on our website, okay, until the end of the year. And so, yeah, if you want to stock up on some cakes from our collection, it's time to do it. And we've just released a couple of new teas. included this one. Maybe it's already sold out by the end of this live stream. I don't know. But yeah, feel free to check. And thank you very much for your support this year. This was wonderful. We're again at plus 50% sales compared to last year. We hope we will keep growing exponentially that way. And yeah. So thank you for watching and see you later. Bye bye.